So here we have Bold, one of the DD tanks of the first Hussars that launched on D-Day and didn't do so well. So Léo Gariepy, who wrote an extensive report after landing, describes this tank going down because it was a CO's tank. And it sat at the bottom of the channel for 27 years? 27 years. Nearly 27 years. And Gariepy was one of the people behind getting it back out. He moved to Corseul after the war. Some years later, became a citizen here. And he's one of the people who helped liberate it. So this is a really good time to talk about what makes a DD tank, or what the differences are, right? DD means dual drive, so it can go on land, and a normal Sherman could, but also swim, and we'll get to that in a second. So the bow in the front is always the telltale sign and footage, and usually the canvas screen, which would go right on top of that. And it was supported by tubes and braces, which you can see the little brackets for right here, holding them in place. Usually had to be kicked into place, and you can see the holes for the screen right along here. So they were intended to swim ashore and then come in and deal with things like concrete, or say that 50mm gun over there. They're much maligned. However, here on Juno Beach, right here near Corseul, they did an amazing job and did as they were supposed to. Particularly over on the other side, where the Winnipegs came ashore, their CEO wrote that without them, the casualties would have been much higher. So they really had some value for the Winnipegs. And the Canscots who landed with them. So it's not on here anymore, but they would have propellers in the back right here. That would be the dual drive. And then they could be moved either from the driver position, which would be pretty below the waterline while coming ashore, or by the commander, who had a platform up top, and he could steer it with tiller bars that connect to the back, bring it ashore. Very harrowing, no matter how you look at it. A few of them got taken out by fire, both enemy and friendly. But Bold is one of the few here that went in on its own due to the rough sea conditions. J.S. Duncan, who was the commander of B Squadron that Gariepy was part of, and therefore he was the commander of Bold as well, also wrote about his experience on D-Day and what happened to him as Bold went down. So I'll read from his report. As we approached closer to the beach, waves appeared to increase in size. However, we seemed to be making good headway, and I thought we would make the beach easily. When we were, I judged, about 200 yards from the edge of the water, there was a large splash close on my starboard side. At the same time, my driver said something I couldn't understand over the IC intercom, but glancing down, I saw that the right screen had collapsed against the side of the turret, which was already almost full of water. I gave the order to bail out and attempt to get the dinghy open. The crew all got out, but the tank sank immediately and took me down with it. I came to the surface again, but I had just got one breath when the tank came partway up to the top again and rolled over, catching my feet, taking me down again. I freed myself, and on surfacing again, swam some distance to the dinghy, which one of the crew had opened. The other three of the crew were drifting some distance away. Sometime later, an LCPL, or a landing craft personnel large, took the corporal and I on board and delivered us to LCH-168. We were later transferred to an LST and sent to the UK. Meanwhile, the squadron was proceeding towards the beach, and I could see that the majority of them were still afloat in spite of the heavy going. Gariepy's account of Bold going into the channel reads as such. The order to launch was however given at approximately 7,000 yards directly in front of our appointed beach. As we became waterborne, commenced terrific rolling and pitching. All 5 craft were launched, but formation was impossible, so I decided to make for my appointed place on the beach. There was no enemy fire for about 4,000 yards, when we were showered with small arms fire. I then looked around me to see who was following alongside of me, and the only other craft who was parallel was Major Duncan's, 30 yards on my starboard side. He seemed to be in difficulties because the dinghy was being prepared. At that point, one of my port aft struts broke, and the crew had to wedge an extinguisher between the hull and screen. Immediately after 2 pillars burst through small arm, which was increasing in density, I took another look at Major Duncan's DD craft, and all I saw was 4 heads in the water. The other craft were some 200 yards behind in different positions. I then realized it was up to me to make for the beach. With God's help, we made it. I then followed the crew inside the turret, keeping one half open, as to have an occasional look for mines and obstacles at water edge. When I judged it safe to deflate, we did so, and then we immediately opened fire on the pillbox, which was on our immediate front, with 75mm HE, high explosive. After 5 rounds, I advanced another 50 yards and fired 5 more rounds of AP, armor piercing. We were then about 150 yards from target. As there were no other fire answering except small arms, I looked back to see if a way was clear for the AVRE, so that's Assault Vehicle Royal Engineers. I then engaged machine gun nests dotting the beach, which were playing merry hell along the waterline. I took hull down position by pillbox and looked around for Squadron. All I could see was 5 tanks on my left. That was on the left-hand side of Alba, which was the code name for Core Souls. The AVREs were then coming in with equipment for anti-tank ditch immediately in front of me over a railway gauge. I was able to find photos of Bold after it had been pulled out of the channel in 1970. The photos come from the First Hussars Museum, which is in London, Ontario. They're a great museum. I highly suggest checking them out if you can. If you're ever in the London area, be sure to check if they are open. They are a small museum, so they're not open all the time, but in the summer months they are. So if you're there over, say, the summer of 2024, be a good time to check out their museum and learn about one of the Canadian units that fought in Normandy. In this photo, you can see Gariepy on the left and Master Warrant Officer Frank Price on the right. So they're pulling it up at the beach there. In the background, you can see the pier at Core Souls, which is still there today. And I took much footage, including that in the video from there. So it's very cool to see an older photo. You can see it being pulled up the beach and towards the area where it would eventually end up. Of course, it went through some restoration before that, but it's very cool to see these photos of Bold being pulled out of the channel well after it went down on D-Day. I posted the link to where I got the photos from. It's a Facebook post, so hopefully the link stays active. It has been up for quite some time, so it should be okay for a while. Bold is a fascinating piece of kit that sits just off the beach in Courseulles-sur-Mer. It is an excellent reminder of what it took for D-Day to be successful and the different types of innovation that went into trying to make the landings better for the Allied soldiers coming ashore. Now, of course, Bold, as I have pointed out earlier in the video, went into the sea. However, it was not representative of what happened to all the DDs that came ashore on Juno Beach.